Welcome to Insight Meditation Community of Charlotte. My name is Thea Powers, and I'd like to talk to you today about a popular topic, the topic of suffering. And this is something we naturally turn away from, and yet the Buddha tells us that we will be better off if we turn towards it. And so, how best to do this is one of the things I'd like to talk about today. And also, why? Why do we want to or need to do this, turning towards our suffering? So, in the Majjhima Nikaya 19, it is written, whatever a person frequently thinks about and ponders, that will become the inclination of their mind. And in today's climate, it is very easy, at least for me, to think about and ponder negative things, climate change and divisive politics, the outcome of the election in 2 weeks, the wars all around the world, and on and on and on. And so I really do not want my mind to be trained to worry and be anxious. And yet I don't want to bury my head in the sand. And so, how do we, as students of the Buddha's teachings, address something like this particular problem or situation, I should say? One way that I have found helpful is from Philip Moffat. And this is something he calls gladdening the mind. And it is so simple and easy to do. It can be a formal meditation, or it can just be a pause during the day. And it goes like this. We might close our eyes and take a breath and think of someone who has helped us along the way in our lifetime. Could be a teacher that we have a fondness for, that we learned a lot from. It could be a parent or a grandparent, a favorite auntie or uncle, a friend, even an animal, especially an animal. And feel your heart open as you think of this being that was kind to you, that helped you, that perhaps showed you the way in some way. And feel gratitude now that you had that experience. And now open your eyes. Something as simple as gladdening the mind, we can feel it in our bodies when we get too worried and too concerned about the events in our lifetime. And so I find that to be a really helpful thing to do. We're not making things up. We're simply noticing that when we think about these things, we feel like this. And when we think about these things, we feel like this. And so we can titrate a little bit between those feelings and incline the mind towards gladness and gratitude. This is what Sayadaw U Tejaniya has to say on this topic. Thoughts of wanting or not wanting, strongly disliking that person and liking this one, judgments and fear. These in themselves are not a problem. They almost always become a problem because these types of repetitive thoughts and emotions often become the attitude or the distorted view and the clouded lens that we see all of life through. And so, very similar to the Majjhima Nikaya verse, what becomes the inclination of the mind? What becomes the habit of mind? Um, and so when we incline ourselves towards wholesome thoughts and wholesome actions, it actually lessens our suffering and lessens the suffering of those around us. So that's two things to remember and practice. And now let's look at something that has been worrying all of the people in North Carolina, particularly in Western North Carolina, the incredible storm that moved through here 2.5 weeks ago, taking lives, removing homes, and creating chaos through beautiful towns all throughout the Western North Carolina mountains. So, stormy weather is defined as heavy rain accompanied by thunder and lightning, clouds, and high winds. And in our personal lives, we can also mirror this by having difficult decisions with serious consequences. All of these instances bring an increased potential for instability and unpredictability and chaos and harm. And so, no wonder we worry and get anxious during these times. So, what do we normally do is we normally wish things would be different. We don't want another hurricane gathering strength right on the heels of the first one. We don't want these bloody conflicts in the Middle East and Russia and Ukraine. We don't want a civil war in Sudan. This suffering that is all around us really can take a toll. Wanting things to be other than they are includes not wanting hateful and violent divisions or those in our highest offices not being trustworthy or compassionate. There's so much suffering connected to all of these things. And I think that we have heart pleas that they be different. And I think that also the earth being in such a state of raging weather patterns with chills and fever, so out of balance, also causes me to worry a lot. And yet, Walt Whitman writes, these are the days that must happen to you. And so I feel like studying suffering today is a really worthwhile way to spend our time, even though at first you think, why would I want to study suffering? And yet, if we don't understand it, then we don't see what brings it about, and we don't have a way to lessen it, to lessen our suffering. We naturally want things to be different. And I notice this in myself every single day, in usually in embarrassingly minute things. For example, my favorite Trader Joe's is always a chaotic, hard to find a parking place, takes forever to check out. And I love going there and I dread going there too. Um, and that's embarrassing because that's nothing compared to these other things. But this simple example kind of disappears in these other more life threatening situations. I bring it up to say that little tiny sufferings are present all day, every day, and then we layer on larger, more looming and serious sufferings. And we find ourselves maybe being anxious a lot of the time. And so, if we feel out of balance and we're tuned into the suffering, maybe we have a heart's yearning for things to be different. And the way that we could address that is through prayer, through meditation, through heartfelt intentions, even rituals and disciplines that are meant to clear and cleanse ourselves. We can do our part to be healthy, to be kind, to do our daily practice, to do our yoga or our pickleball or whatever keeps our bodies moving and healthy. And I know that we, as students of the Buddha's teachings all over the world, hold views and intentions of wholesomeness. This is a very big part of the Eightfold Path. We also aspire to generosity and joy, compassion, kindness, and equanimity as ways of living, just as ways of being. And this goes far beyond sitting on the cushion to meditate each day. It means that our study becomes our life, so to speak. And the cushion is just the sweet spot where we get to be still and look into things as they really are. We are all beings filled with an animating and intelligent energy. Science can both affirm this, measure this, and continue to be baffled by it. Where does this mysterious energy come from? And when we die, where does it go? As mysterious as energy may be, it's indispensable and one of the most important tools we have in our practice, because this is the tool that we can observe and manipulate as we go through all these feeling tones during the day. And notice, when I do this, I feel this. When I do this, I think this, and this becomes this action. It's really quite valuable and simple and sort of amazing that everybody doesn't do it. So you can discern for yourself tonight if this is a helpful talk or just an offering up of my personal preferences, or just a plea for anyone who is listening to possibly begin to slow down and observe themselves. And maybe it's all of the above. Our community practices in the Theravada tradition, but we hold respect for many traditions, and our primary practice is called Vipassana. Vipassana means seeing things as they are, or clear seeing, hence the term insight, which also means seeing into the way things really are. So we are taught a heart practice that comes directly from training the mind, and it involves heart and mind, or in the teachings of the Buddha, this is called chitta. Heart and mind are one thing. As mentioned, Vipassana means seeing things as they are, and this means without clouds of anger or greed or delusion that crop up every day, all the time, in little or big ways. But seeing things as they are also means recognizing cause and effect, a simple but easy to forget part of the chain of some of the catastrophic events of late. Some of these things are simply cause and effect. I might venture to say that all of these things are simply cause and effect, which is another word for karma, but that's such a loaded word. We won't even go there right now. So, Vipassana trains us to have a capacity to be open to all of this, to create a place in our body, heart, and mind that is robust enough to hold all of this suffering with kindness and gentleness. The ability to hold our own suffering is where we begin, and then we can eventually hold the suffering of others. For myself, when I suffer initially, the inclination is to not want to be uncomfortable, to be stressed out, to be hurting. And with this practice, I can now immediately turn towards compassion and soften towards the suffering and towards my reaction to the suffering, which changes the whole dynamic, changes the whole relationship. And I think this is the crux really of the talk today is what is the relationship to suffering and how can we best understand, get underneath it and learn from it. So that brings us to the first noble truth. There is suffering. We are instructed to understand the truth that in a sentient being's life, and a sentient being is anything with a consciousness, in a sentient being's life, there will be some suffering. Some joy is going to be there for certain too. And it seems that we don't need a lot of encouragement or training in understanding and cultivating joy. We naturally go for happy things. So, our suffering includes everything from a broken nail to financial distress to public shame or embarrassment or heartbreak or even cancer, addiction, mental illness, murder. There is much, much, much suffering in the world. It's a very long list. When you hear the list, can you feel yourself pull away? It's just so natural to not want to keep looking and be curious about suffering. We're naturally averse to coming close to disease and perceived failure. It's our instinct to avoid suffering and failure because we are hardwired for survival. And yet, the Buddhist teaching approaches suffering in a very nuanced and persistent way because suffering will be with us, around us, and within us. If we ignore it, it means it will return and it will not be lessened until we have this wise capacity to see it and be with it. Personally, my heart has been aching a lot for days, off and on for weeks now. While writing this talk, I found out that my dear friend Zara died. And even though Zara is a collie, a dog, I had to stop and weep tears of love for her gentle ways, for her persistent kindness. And I felt like it opened me up to this, to be able to give this talk, because it was a relief to cry. I think sometimes we really need to just cry when we are feeling into our suffering and the suffering of those around us. And so that was a blessing in a way. There is, I find, an uncomfortable collective energy in the air before this presidential election, a very significant election. Collective anxiety is a real thing. And as we become more and more aware of energy and other people's suffering, we feel it. And there are many people and things right here in our meditation community, people living with different levels of deep personal grief, of unrelenting pain, maybe in the grip of addiction or struggling with the heaviness of depression. We are not exempt from these things. Just because we strive to be good and to understand does not make us exempt. It does put us in the perfect place to be good students. So there is a writer named Bayo Akomolafe, and he writes about trauma and says severe or prolonged suffering can cause trauma, and the residue of this suffering can cling to us, exerting a powerful force, making it challenging to see clearly and stay regulating. And he says the effects can be a distortion of the past and the present, and the tendency to reduce things down to black and white. And so this obscures the capacity to see nuance. It might cause us to grasp onto views tightly and grow rigid about our ideas, being either anti X or pro X. And once we are in this realm, it's very easy to dehumanize each other. And this may be prevalent in our country right now. It's just something to think about. So, what to do about all this? We've talked about gladdening the heart. We've talked about softening and having compassion for ourselves and seeing how that feels in the body. Um, Jack Cornfield writes, because the awakened heart is vast, like the sky, it can hold everything, your tears and your laughter, your struggles and your triumphs. It's the source of profound love, deep compassion, and steady equanimity. And here's the wonderful thing is that we don't have to create awakened heart. That is our natural essence. As we begin to remove all the layers of worry and mental proliferation and work on the wholesome qualities, awakened heart is there waiting. It's there already. So I hope this has not been too much today. I think it's imperative for us to go about our days mindfully with awareness and attention and notice when we feel tension coming up, be able to just pause and kind of just go, okay, here it is again. Part of my life is suffering, you know. And so don't fall asleep in meditation. Don't be bored. There's always something to pay attention to. And awareness, the energy of awareness is almost always um, ready to infuse us. It's rarely tired. So you can check that out. So I'm hoping that we come to understand suffering so well that we become naturally tolerant and forgiving to ourselves and to others. And this doesn't make us just soft. This makes us more like a warrior who has trained through firsthand experience, almost like hand-to-hand combat with our own suffering. We know this situation well and we know how to put it to rest, and we're in a way making friends with it. So let's attend to our hearts and to our communities so that we can function with heart clarity and work through differences. No matter what this election outcome is, how do we contribute to restoration, to peace between neighbors, and justice as a common ideal? Let's let all this sink in. And I'd like to end with one last practice tonight. Closing your eyes again. And let yourself be in touch with something that brings a sense of wonder to you. Anything that feels healing both inside and out. Feeling that softening in the heart and sensing into the heart space. Imagine that you have doors in the front and the back of your heart. And as you breathe, those doors just naturally open and gently close. You can breathe out the back side of your heart. Maybe breathing in through the front and exhaling out through the back. See how that feels for 2 or 3 breaths. Just easy. And after your next exhale, gently close those doors on the back side of your heart and latch them. They can be open at any time. The next time that you hurt, be grateful that you have a tender heart. Thank you so much for listening tonight.